The email arrived at 12:03 a.m., and by sunrise, everything he owned felt uncertain. Overnight, the HOA had changed the rules, and they thought no one would fight back. Mark Ellison had lived in Cedar Ridge for nearly a decade. He paid his dues on time, kept his lawn trimmed, and rarely attended meetings. Life there had always felt predictable, calm, safe. Until the message titled "Immediate Policy Amendments" landed in his inbox. At first, he assumed it was routine. A minor landscaping adjustment. Maybe parking guidelines. But as he read further, his stomach tightened. The HOA had banned all exterior structures not pre-approved under a new architectural standard. That included sheds, detached workshops, and non-conforming improvements. Mark's detached garage, built 6 years earlier, fully permitted by the city, was now listed as a violation. He reread the email 3 times, effective immediately. Non-compliant structures must be removed within 45 days or incur daily fines. No vote. No discussion. No warning, just a decision made overnight. Neighbors began texting in confusion. Some were angry. Others afraid. But the board president insisted the changes were within procedural authority. Mark didn't respond publicly. Instead, he opened the original governing documents he had stored in a folder labeled "just in case." He didn't know it yet, but buried inside those pages was a single clause that would change everything. And when he found it, the board would wish they had never rushed that midnight email. Mark spread the printed HOA declaration across his kitchen table as morning light filled the room. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't confrontational. But he believed in fairness. Page after page detailed architectural guidelines, enforcement powers, and amendment procedures. Most of it was dense, repetitive legal language. The kind most homeowners never read. Then he reached Article 14, Amendments and Modifications. His eyes slowed. It clearly stated that any amendment materially altering property use rights or structural permissions required approval from at least 75% of homeowners in a recorded vote, not a board resolution, not an emergency decision, a community vote. Mark leaned back in his chair. The overnight email had claimed the board acted under emergency authority to protect neighborhood standards. But there had been no emergency. No structural failures. No complaints. His garage had stood peacefully for 6 years. He checked the meeting minutes posted online. No vote. No notice of a ballot. Just a brief entry stating the board approved updated standards. The realization was slow, steady, undeniable. They had skipped the very safeguard that limited their power. Still, Mark didn't celebrate. He knew challenging an HOA publicly could escalate quickly, but something inside him shifted. Not anger, clarity. If the board believed no one would question them. They had underestimated the quiet homeowner who kept records, and Friday night's emergency meeting was only 2 days away. The clubhouse buzzed with tension Friday evening. Folding chairs filled quickly as neighbors whispered about fines and removal notices. Some looked nervous. Others frustrated. Board President Linda Carter stood confidently at the podium. Her tone was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. These updates are necessary to preserve property values, she explained. The board acted within its discretion. Mark listened quietly from the third row. When the floor opened for comments, hands shot up. Questions about costs. Timelines. Exceptions. Linda answered each one firmly, repeating the phrase board authority. Finally, Mark stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply asked, "Can you confirm the recorded homeowner vote that satisfies Article 14, Section B?" The room fell silent. Linda paused. She shuffled her papers. The board determined this fell under administrative authority. Mark walked calmly to the front and handed her a highlighted copy of the clause. Murmurs spread as copies passed between neighbors. The language was clear. Unambiguous. Any structural use amendment required 75% homeowner approval. Linda attempted to dismiss it as interpretive language. But another neighbor stood up. Then another. Within minutes, the tone shifted. This was no longer about sheds or garages, it was about process, and for the first time, the board looked uncertain. The tension in the room thickened as more homeowners examined the printed clause. Conversations grew louder. The board members huddled briefly, whispering among themselves. Linda returned to the microphone. The board reserves the right to clarify outdated provisions. Mark remained steady. Clarification requires amendment. Amendment requires a vote. His voice stayed even, respectful, but the impact was undeniable. A retired attorney in the back row confirmed the reading. The language is straightforward, he said. You cannot bypass a supermajority requirement. Linda's confidence began to crack. She shifted to a new argument: temporary enforcement pending community ratification. Mark calmly responded, fines issued without proper amendment could be challenged as invalid. The word challenged hung in the air. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted legal disputes. No one wanted escalating fees funded by HOA dues. For the first time, the board members looked less like authority figures and more like volunteers who had moved too quickly. A motion was proposed from the floor: suspend enforcement until a formal vote could be scheduled. Hands rose across the room, almost unanimously. Linda hesitated, then nodded. The rule would be paused. But what no one yet understood was how much deeper the consequences might run. Over the next week, emails flew between board members, legal counsel, and concerned homeowners. The atmosphere shifted from authority to damage control. During a formal consultation, the HOA's attorney reviewed the documents closely. His conclusion was quiet but firm: if fines were issued under an improperly adopted amendment, they could be deemed unenforceable, he said. And enforcement attempts could expose the board to liability. The word liability carried weight. The HOA's insurance policy, as it turned out, excluded coverage for actions taken outside governing authority. That meant personal exposure, not collective, personal. Suddenly, what had seemed like a simple procedural shortcut became a serious governance mistake. Linda scheduled a follow-up meeting, this time noticeably subdued. She acknowledged that the amendment process had not followed the required threshold. A formal vote would be necessary. Whispers filled the room again, but this time they were different. This wasn't about garages anymore. It was about trust, and trust, once shaken, doesn't easily return. Mark sat quietly in the back, saying nothing. He hadn't set out to embarrass anyone, he only wanted fairness. But the ripple effects of that hidden clause were still unfolding. The community vote was scheduled for the following month. Ballots were mailed. Discussions filled neighborhood sidewalks. For the first time in years, homeowners were reading their governing documents. Transparency became the unexpected result. When voting day arrived, turnout was the highest Cedar Ridge had ever seen. The proposed amendment failed to reach 75%, not even close. Many residents explained they weren't opposed to standards, they were opposed to process shortcuts. Linda stood before the room once more, this time with a different tone. She announced she would step down at the end of her term. The decision felt less like defeat and more like acknowledgement. Mark never celebrated publicly. He continued maintaining his property as he always had, but something fundamental had shifted. The board no longer operated unchecked. Neighbors felt empowered. A single overlooked clause had restored balance to the entire community, yet one final twist remained, a quiet consequence no one saw coming. 2 weeks after the failed vote, a letter arrived from the HOA's insurer. It requested confirmation that all enforcement actions tied to the invalid amendment had been rescinded. The board complied immediately. Every violation notice was formally withdrawn, fines erased, records corrected. The hidden clause hadn't just paused a rule, it had protected every homeowner from improper enforcement, and it revealed something deeper. Rules only work when they are followed by everyone, including those who create them. Cedar Ridge slowly returned to normal. Lawns were trimmed. Garages stood undisturbed. Conversations felt lighter, but the culture had changed. Homeowners attended meetings now. They asked questions. They voted. Mark never sought recognition. He simply kept a copy of Article 14 in his folder labeled just in case. Because sometimes the most powerful defense isn't anger, it's preparation. The HOA had changed the rules overnight, believing no one would notice. But one hidden legal clause destroyed their authority, not with confrontation, but with clarity, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.